I don't know if it's making the job difficult. I mean, it's honestly been a joy to be around the whole offense this whole camp. Just the way.
Your decision difficult, not your job.
Okay, yeah.
How difficult are they making the decision to choose a starter?
I mean, we don't have to make it tomorrow, so I would say that that's probably a question for another few weeks. But both guys are developing very nicely. We know they're different players, but the areas that they need to improve on, they've both done that, and that's been very encouraging.
You spent $230 million and 3 first-round picks, and the guy's played 19 games, and he's tore his Achilles tendon twice. Like, this is crazy. Like, you need to know what you have with Shedeur Sanders. Oh, and by the way, Taylon Green and Dillon Gabriel. Like, cut your losses. Move on from Deshaun Watson. He's a skilled, diminished player at this point in time.
It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time for everybody to have him start any meaningful time.
The Cleveland Browns came into training camp expecting clarity. 12 days later, they may have created an even bigger quarterback problem. This was supposed to be the stretch where somebody finally grabbed control, forced the coaches to stop rotating the conversation, and made the decision feel obvious. Instead, every time it looked like Deshaun Watson might finally create separation, Shedeur Sanders found another way to pull himself right back into the middle of the discussion. And if you were sitting inside that offensive meeting room with Todd Monken and offensive coordinator Travis Switzer, watching every snap from the beginning of camp until now, there is one thing that would be almost impossible to ignore. This battle has refused to die. Think about where this started. Watson walked into camp with the experience, the contract, the first-team opportunities, and every reason to believe he could control the competition early. Nobody needed him to be perfect. The Browns simply needed him to look clearly better. That was the easiest path for everybody involved. If Watson came out sharp, protected the football, consistently moved the offense, and stacked strong practices together, the conversation around Shedeur would naturally become quieter. The coaches would have their answer, the media would eventually move on, and Cleveland could begin building the offense around one clear direction. But that clean story never really developed. Instead, the first part of camp immediately gave people something to talk about. Watson had stretches where the mistakes became difficult to overlook, including interceptions that kept bringing the quarterback competition right back into focus. And while that was happening, Shedeur was not disappearing into the background. He was making throws, creating touchdowns, showing confidence, and giving the coaching staff enough positive tape that they could not simply treat this like a veteran holding off a young quarterback who clearly was not ready. That is where the entire feeling around this competition started changing. From a coordinator's perspective, this is where things become much more complicated than fans sometimes realize. Travis Switzer and Todd Monken are not just watching the most exciting highlight from practice. They have to judge the entire operation. Did the quarterback get the offense lined up correctly? Did he understand the protection? Was the ball supposed to come out when it did? Did he work through the progression, or did he simply get lucky because somebody broke open?
He shouldn't be one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the world, despite all the injuries.
At $258 million?
Yeah.
He wasn't the last time he was out there. I think that's the part, going to your point, Granny, just the football side of it was in 2024 when he was out there as a starter for the Cleveland Browns. It wasn't pretty. So I think to what JW was saying, like, yes, I agree. If throughout the entire offseason, if he proves to be better than the other quarterbacks in the room, he should be a starter. But I think that speaks more to the other quarterbacks in the room, that a guy that wasn't good in 2024, that has 2 Achilles injuries, is now going to be the best quarterback to lead you forward. I don't know if that's a good sign.
Did he make the same mistake twice? Coaches are looking at all of that. But that is exactly why Shedeur continuing to make noticeable plays matters so much. If he were only surviving because of one deep completion every few days, this competition probably would not feel this serious anymore. Then came some of the first real turning points. There were practices where Watson struggled with turnovers while Shedeur responded with scoring plays and cleaner stretches. There were situational periods where Shedeur showed that he could handle pressure and still move the offense. There were throws into tighter windows that started getting attention beyond the usual excitement surrounding his name. Suddenly, the question was no longer whether Shedeur could make camp interesting. He already had. The question became whether Watson could do enough to stop Shedeur from making every future practice matter. That distinction is huge. Because Watson did have good days. There were moments when he looked more comfortable. There were practices where people around the team could point to improvement and say, this is what Cleveland has been waiting to see. But one strong practice does not automatically erase everything that happened before it, especially when the quarterback behind you keeps producing enough positive moments to stay alive in the competition. Every time Watson appeared ready to build momentum, Shedeur seemed to create another reason for everybody to keep watching. And that may be the biggest surprise of this entire camp. The Browns did not necessarily need Shedeur Sanders to dominate every day for this to become uncomfortable. They only needed him to remain close enough that the coaches could not completely close the door. That is exactly what has happened. Watson has had the better opportunity structure at different points. He has worked with stronger units. He has had stretches where the offense looked better under him. Yet after all these practices, people are still debating the same thing they were debating near the beginning. Has anybody actually pulled away? For Monken and Switzer, that creates pressure from two different directions. On one side, you have the responsibility to reward experience and evaluate Watson fairly with the top offense. On the other side, you have Shedeur continuing to put throws on film that demand attention. And once a younger quarterback keeps producing under different circumstances, every decision about reps suddenly becomes part of the story too. That is how this camp changed. At first, the story was simply about performance. Watson versus Shedeur, veteran versus younger quarterback. Who looks sharper? Who protects the football? Who moves the offense? But as the days passed, that question started turning into something much more uncomfortable for Cleveland. If Shedeur Sanders keeps making enough plays to stay this close, how long can the Browns keep evaluating this competition the same way before the reps themselves become part of the controversy? By the middle of Browns training camp, the quarterback battle had already changed completely.
I think you're right about what Todd's going to do, and Todd doesn't strike me as someone as sort of a grizzled, old-timey coach, if you will, who's going to succumb to peer pressure or social media pressure or whatever. I would imagine he doesn't spend a lot of time on social media. But he also is a pretty competitive guy and is all about winning, and we've seen him at various stops. He can handle young players, but he also comes from an era where, tough love might be the answer. So whether that's Deshaun or Shedeur, I think it doesn't really matter in the short term for the organization. I think it matters for Shedeur and find out whether he is anything more than a one-year stopgap. Because I've been saying this since the draft, and I think Andrew Berry's done a great job the last two drafts. But if you took this team, I probably told you guys this too, you put them in Houston and gave them C.J. Stroud, they're winning 10 or 11 games. Like the team on paper is great outside of the most important position. So whether Deshaun gets you to 6 or 7 or 8 wins or Shedeur does, I think one of those guys is going to have to play out of their minds to keep the job beyond 2026.
Wait, the Browns are good enough to do that, you're saying? Well, outside of QB?
If they had a quarterback, I think. If you told me C.J. Stroud was their quarterback, I think they're in the mix to win the division.
It was no longer enough to ask which quarterback looked better on a given day. The bigger question became much more uncomfortable for Cleveland. Who was actually getting the best chance to prove it? That is where the reps started becoming almost as important as the throws themselves. Early in camp, Deshaun Watson was getting the kind of work you would expect from the more experienced quarterback. He had access to first-team periods, stronger supporting units, and more chances to operate the offense in situations that looked closer to what Cleveland would actually want on Sundays. That made sense on the surface. Watson had been in the league longer. He knew what a full NFL operation looked like, and the Browns still had every reason to evaluate whether he could take control of the job. But the problem was that Shedeur Sanders kept doing enough with his own opportunities to make the rep distribution impossible to ignore. That is where this competition started moving from football evaluation into controversy. If Shedeur had struggled badly every time he worked with the second unit, nobody would have cared that Watson was getting the better setup. The Browns could have continued with the same plan, and nobody would have questioned it much. But that was not what happened. Shedeur kept finding ways to make throws. He kept creating scoring opportunities. He kept showing enough command that people outside the building started asking why he was not being given more chances with the same players Watson was working with. And once that question appears, it does not go away easily. From an offensive coordinator's chair, this is where things become difficult. Travis Switzer and Todd Monken are not just trying to make fans happy. They have to build an offense, evaluate protections, test timing, and figure out how each quarterback handles different personnel groups. Sometimes one quarterback gets a certain period because the staff wants to test one specific concept. Sometimes another quarterback works with the second group because the coaches want to see whether he can elevate less experienced players. That is normal football evaluation. But even if there are football reasons behind the rotation, the public only sees one thing: who gets the first team reps? And suddenly every practice becomes a debate. When Watson gets the top group and has a solid stretch, people say he is pulling ahead. When Shedeur works with a lower unit and still produces, people immediately ask what would happen if he had the same receivers, same protection, and same structure. That is how the reps themselves became evidence in the argument. There were days when Shedeur was not operating with the first team, yet he still made throws that got people talking. There were days where the offensive line around him was different, the receivers were different, and the rhythm of the period was different, but the ball still came out accurately. That does not automatically mean he was better than Watson, but it absolutely made the competition harder to judge. because now you are no longer comparing two quarterbacks under identical conditions. You are comparing performances inside different environments. That matters.
Or not C.J. Stroud. Yeah, C.J. Stroud.
Yeah, you can say whatever you want. Yeah, that's fine.
So you're a believer in the Browns' totally rebuild offensive line.
Yeah, I think they're going to be better. But, yeah, look, young guys are a reason for concern. We don't know where Spencer Fontaine is going to look like. He hasn't played left tackle for a couple of years. I like the edge with which he's playing and all the things we talk about in terms of the storylines coming out of training camp line. But, right, we'll find out. We'll find out right quick what it looks like. But the skill position players are really good. The defense is still going to be really good. They lost Jim Schwartz. That's a big deal. And obviously trading Myles Garrett for Jared Verse is going to be a downgrade, but I don't think as huge a one as the team still wasn't very good last year with Myles Garrett. So I think they are, and I think the wide receivers, the young wide receivers are going to be a lot of fun early on. I think they're a quarterback away from sort of putting this thing together and being competitive, consistently competitive in the AFC North.
A quarterback throwing behind the starting offensive line can play differently than one working with backups. A receiver with better chemistry can turn a difficult throw into a completion. A protection breakdown can make a quarterback look worse than the actual decision was. Coaches understand that. Fans understand some of it too. But once Shedeur continued producing under different circumstances, the calls for more equal reps became louder. And the Browns could feel that pressure. This was especially important because Shedeur's best moments were not limited to one type of throw. He showed flashes over the middle. He attacked layered windows. He made timing throws. He had stretches where the offense moved with rhythm. Those are exactly the kinds of plays that make coaches want more tape, not less. So now Cleveland had a new problem. The more Shedeur showed, the harder it became to keep the competition framed as a simple veteran evaluation. If Watson was clearly ahead, the reps would not be controversial. If Shedeur was clearly behind, the reps would not be controversial. But when the gap feels small enough that people are still debating it every day, every decision starts carrying extra weight. And that is exactly what happened around the middle of this camp. The conversation stopped being only about interceptions, touchdowns, and completion streaks. It became about opportunity. Was Shedeur getting enough first-team work? Was Watson being given more room to settle into the offense? Were the coaches simply following a planned rotation, or were they protecting a hierarchy that was already becoming harder to defend? Once the reps became part of the conversation, the Browns' quarterback battle stopped feeling like a normal camp competition and started feeling like a pressure test for the entire coaching staff, because now every decision was being watched. Every first-team snap mattered. Every interception mattered. Every clean drive mattered. And most importantly, every time Shedeur Sanders looked good without getting the exact same setup as Deshaun Watson, the same question kept coming back even louder. How much more does he have to show before Cleveland gives him a bigger opportunity? That is where this whole thing became dangerous for the Browns from a public perception standpoint. Todd Monken and Travis Switzer could explain the rotation however they wanted. They could talk about evaluation. They could talk about different periods. They could talk about wanting to test quarterbacks in different situations. All of that can be completely legitimate. But football fans are not just watching the explanation. They are watching the field, and if the field keeps giving them reasons to believe the competition is still alive, eventually the explanation has to match what people are seeing. That is exactly why the middle stretch of camp became so important. There were practices where Watson looked better. That happened.
The reality is that why I'm able and why I'm comfortable to say that you have to have a quick hook with Deshaun is that we have years with an S of experience of Deshaun not getting there and not being good enough and in a Browns uniform completely falling flat on his face.
And
we don't have years with an S of Shedeur doing that.
Well, and a young developmental quarterback, that has been the label that has been bestowed upon Shedeur. If they start at an okay level, the idea is 17 weeks, even if you have one bad week here or 2 or 3 bad weeks here, over the course of 18 weeks, eventually you can get to a point where that guy's better at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And you don't really get that with Deshaun.
Right, agreed.
And like, to me, like he gets better is he was rusty the first 2 weeks, and then the next 4 weeks he looks dramatically better. But even then, with Deshaun, I have no patience. Week 1, win. And it would help if you also looked really good while doing it.
Yeah.
What is more important to Shedeur being successful this season, starting the most amount of games of any Browns quarterback, or starting week 1?
There were moments where he looked more comfortable, moved the offense, and gave the coaching staff cleaner tape. That matters, and pretending it did not happen would make the entire evaluation less fair. But the problem for Cleveland was that those good Watson days did not end the conversation. Shedeur kept coming back. He would have a good period, then a sharp throw. then a difficult completion, then another practice where people walked away talking about him again. That is how you create pressure without even saying anything publicly. And this is where Shedeur's style makes the situation even more interesting. He does not need to dominate every practice to change the mood around the competition. He just needs to keep staying close enough that the Browns cannot comfortably say the battle is over. That is a massive difference. When one quarterback clearly runs away with the competition, everybody feels it. The media stops asking the same questions. Coaches start speaking more confidently. The rep distribution becomes easier to understand. The locker room starts adjusting naturally. But that never fully happened here. Instead, Cleveland kept getting these back and forth signals. Watson would have a stronger day, and suddenly people would say the veteran was finally taking control. Then Shedeur would respond with another impressive stretch, and immediately the debate would reopen. That is not what a coaching staff wants when they are trying to simplify the most important position on the field. And by day 8 and day 9, Shedeur was still creating moments that were hard to ignore. One of the biggest reasons was that some of his throws were not just easy completions. He was attacking tighter windows. He was showing touch over defenders. He was putting the ball into spots where the receiver had a real chance to make a play. He was showing the kind of confidence that makes a quarterback competition uncomfortable for whoever is supposed to be ahead. Now imagine watching all of that from Travis Switzer's seat. You are helping install the offense. You are evaluating timing. You are watching whether the quarterback understands where pressure is coming from. You are looking at footwork, reads, spacing, and communication. And then every day, you have to compare that tape against a completely different practice environment. Watson may be working with one group, Shedeur may be working with another. The protection may not be the same. The receiver quality may not be the same. Even the play calls may not create identical opportunities. That makes it much harder to compare them cleanly. And that is where this competition started becoming almost impossible to discuss without somebody getting frustrated. Fans who support Watson can point to his experience and the stronger days he has produced. Fans who support Shedeur can point to the fact that he has stayed competitive despite not always getting the same level of reps. Both sides can find something on the practice field that supports their argument. That is why the pressure kept rising. The Browns needed separation. Instead, they got debate. And the longer that debate continued, the more attention moved away from the quarterbacks themselves and toward the coaches. Why are the reps being divided this way? What exactly are they trying to see? Is the competition truly open? Has one quarterback already earned more trust behind the scenes? Those questions are dangerous because they create a situation where even a normal football decision can suddenly look suspicious to people outside the building.
It does feel right now, people think Deshaun's got the leg up. As we enter this, do you feel like that's accurate, that right now Deshaun is ahead of Shedeur?
I don't feel like that's accurate, just because it felt like we left minicamp with the opposite sort of being true, that Shedeur Sanders really came on strong over the last few weeks. And I said at the time, I think the fact that Todd Monken declined to name a QB1 on that depth chart, really declined to place anyone as QB1 on that depth chart, because he could have done that and just not named that person, but that wasn't the case. He doesn't know who his QB1 is going to be yet. So that to me is actually a win for Shedeur Sanders, because I definitely think early Deshaun Watson looked like the guy who was ahead. The fact that he didn't close out that competition for me by nature is sort of a win for Sanders, and I guess fans who would like to see Shedeur Sanders get that chance to start.
And then the media started pushing harder. That is when Todd Monken found himself in a completely different battle. Not against another quarterback, not against another team, against the questions surrounding his own evaluation process. By this point, the Browns' quarterback battle was no longer just about Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders. The pressure had moved directly onto Todd Monken because every answer he gave about the competition started getting treated like evidence. That is when the media side of this story started becoming almost as important as what was happening on the field. Monken could talk about development. He could talk about practice structure. He could talk about different periods, different groups, and different things the staff wanted to evaluate. But reporters were looking for something much simpler. Who is ahead? Is Watson better? Is Shedeur catching him? Are they even? And once the questions started getting framed that aggressively, almost every sentence Monken gave could be pulled apart and turned into a headline. That is exactly what happened when the conversation around Watson and Shedeur got heated enough that Monken had to make sure his own words were being understood correctly. He pushed back on the idea that he had simply declared Deshaun Watson better than Shedeur Sanders. That moment mattered, because if the quarterback battle was already decided, there would be no reason for that kind of confusion to create such a reaction. The fact that everybody was listening that closely told you everything about how sensitive this competition had become. And this is where the whole Brown situation started looking messy from the outside. Not necessarily because the coaches had no plan, but because nobody outside the building could clearly see what that plan was. That creates a dangerous environment. One day, Watson gets the first team work, and people immediately assume that is the answer. The next day, Shedeur makes some of the sharper throws, and suddenly the whole discussion flips again. Then Monken speaks to the media, and instead of talking about the offense as a whole, he gets pushed into another round of quarterback questions. That is how a normal training camp evaluation turns into a daily headline machine. And from Travis Switzer's perspective, that has to be frustrating, and because the offensive staff is trying to evaluate dozens of things at the same time. They are looking at protection calls. They are watching how fast the quarterback processes the field. They are studying timing with receivers. They are testing how the offense reacts when the first read is covered. They are trying to figure out which quarterback gives them the best overall operation. But the media does not get to see every meeting. They do not hear every correction. They do not know every reason a player was placed with a certain group. So instead, every rep becomes a clue, and every answer becomes a controversy. That is when the questions can start going too far. Not because reporters should stop asking about the quarterback battle. Of course they should ask. It is the biggest story around the Browns. But when the goal becomes trying to trap a coach into saying one quarterback is clearly better than the other, that is no longer just football evaluation. That becomes about creating a headline. And Monken clearly understood that. You could see the frustration when he had to explain what he actually meant instead of what somebody thought he meant. That matters because it showed how thin the line had become between football conversation and media drama. And while all of that was happening, Shedeur Sanders still kept giving people reasons to ask the questions. That is the key. If Shedeur had completely fallen off on the field, the media pressure would have disappeared on its own. Nobody would care about every Monken sentence. Nobody would be breaking down every rep. Nobody would be debating which unit Shedeur worked with. But because Shedeur kept showing enough positive moments, the questions stayed alive. That puts the coaching staff in a difficult position. If they give Watson more reps, people ask why Shedeur is not getting them. If they give Shedeur more reps, people immediately wonder whether the competition has shifted. If Monken praises Watson, that becomes a headline. If he praises Shedeur, that becomes a headline too. There is almost no neutral answer anymore. And that is the biggest sign that this competition never became as simple as Cleveland probably hoped. A clean quarterback battle usually gets quieter as camp goes on. This one got louder. The media became more aggressive. The rep debate became more intense. The fans started watching every practice report like it was a game result. And instead of settling the quarterback hierarchy, the Browns were now dealing with a completely different problem. Day 12 was supposed to bring this Browns quarterback battle closer to an answer. Instead, it gave Cleveland another reason to keep the door wide open. That is what makes this whole camp story so interesting. At this stage, Deshaun Watson has already had plenty of opportunities to create separation. He has worked with important groups. He has had strong moments. He has had practices where the offense looked more comfortable with him. And on day 12, there were again stretches where Watson had a chance to show that he could finally put some distance between himself and Shedeur Sanders. But once again, the story refused to become simple. Watson opened the day with a mistake that immediately brought attention back to the quarterback battle. That matters because when you are trying to lock down a competition this late in camp, early mistakes become magnified. People are no longer looking at every rep as just another practice snap. They are looking for signs that somebody is finally taking control. And then Shedeur Sanders stepped back into the picture. He was not necessarily working under the exact same conditions as Watson. He was still getting different personnel around him at times, different groups, different situations. But the accuracy kept showing up. That is what has made Shedeur so difficult to remove from this conversation. He does not need every practice to become a highlight reel. He does not need to dominate every period. He simply needs to keep putting enough good football on tape that Todd Monken and Travis Switzer cannot ignore it. And day 12 gave them more of that. There were accurate throws. There were completions where the ball placement looked clean. There were moments where Shedeur appeared comfortable even without having everything around him set up perfectly. There were also plays where the result did not tell the full story. A good ball can still become an incompletion if the receiver does not finish the play. A quarterback can make the right decision and still not get rewarded on the stat sheet. That is why the coaches watching film after practice see a different game than somebody looking only at a tracker. And this is exactly where the Browns are now. The tracker can say one thing. The overall practice feeling can say something else. The coaches can have another evaluation entirely. That is what makes this competition so difficult to read from the outside. Maybe Watson has the cleaner full day. Maybe Shedeur produces the more memorable throws. Maybe one quarterback is better in one period and the other is better in another. But after 12 days, Cleveland still has not created the kind of gap that makes everybody stop debating. That is the real story. It is not that Shedeur Sanders has clearly beaten Deshaun Watson every single day. He has not. It is not that Watson has looked terrible every single day. He has not. The real story is that this camp has lasted long enough for somebody to take control, and yet the competition still feels alive. That is a problem for Cleveland because the longer this goes, the harder the next decision becomes. If the coaches continue giving Watson the better opportunities, every good Shedeur performance will create questions about whether he deserves more. If the coaches increase Shedeur's workload, everybody will immediately see that as evidence that the hierarchy is changing. And if both quarterbacks continue getting significant chances, then the Browns are essentially admitting that the final answer has not arrived yet. That is a very different position from where this team probably expected to be at the beginning of the camp. And from Travis Switzer's chair, this is where film evaluation becomes everything. Forget the headlines. Forget the loudest social media reactions. Forget who won one individual rep. The offensive staff has to look at the full picture. Who processes faster? Who handles pressure better? Who gets the offense into the right look? Who can survive when the first read disappears? Who keeps making the same mistake? Who improves after correction? Those questions matter more than one viral throw or one interception. But even when you evaluate the battle that way, Shedeur continuing to hang around creates a serious decision. Because if Watson had clearly answered all of those questions better, this competition probably would not still feel this close. And that is why Day 12 matters so much. Not because it definitively crowned a winner, because it did the opposite. It showed that even this deep into camp, the Browns still have something to evaluate. Watson can have a better day and Shedeur can still leave people talking. Shedeur can work with a different group and still create pressure. The coaching staff can explain the rotation, but the questions keep returning. And now this competition is moving toward the stage where practice reps may no longer be enough. Soon, Cleveland is going to need to see these quarterbacks in situations where the defense is not wearing the same helmet, where the pressure is real, where the timing changes, and where every decision carries more weight. And that is where this entire Browns training camp story lands right now. After all the practices, all the rotations, all the interceptions, all the strong throws, all the media questions, and all the arguments about reps, Cleveland still has not reached the simple answer everybody expected them to have by now. Deshaun Watson has had chances to take control. Shedeur Sanders has had chances to force the conversation back open. And somehow, after everything we have seen, both of those things can still be true at the same time. That is what makes this quarterback battle so difficult to ignore. Watson has experience. He has had important reps. He has had good stretches and moments where he looked more comfortable in the offense. But Shedeur has continued to stay involved in the story. He keeps making enough plays. He keeps showing enough accuracy. He keeps giving the coaching staff enough positive tape. And most importantly, he keeps making it difficult for Cleveland to say this competition is finished. That is the pressure point now. The Browns do not need another week of headlines. They do not need another round of confusing answers. They do not need another practice where one quarterback looks better for 20 minutes and then the entire conversation flips again the next day. At some point, Todd Monken, Travis Switzer, and the rest of this staff are going to have to make the evaluation more concrete. Who gives this offense the best chance to function consistently? Who handles pressure better? Who can make the right decision when the first option disappears? Who can move this offense without everything around him being perfect? And who has actually earned the right to keep getting the biggest opportunities? That is where this battle is headed. Because training camp did not eliminate the quarterback controversy. It exposed exactly why it still exists. The Browns entered camp looking for separation. Instead, they got a competition that kept creating new questions. Watson has not disappeared. Shedeur has not disappeared. And the coaching staff has not been able to make the conversation disappear either. Now I want to hear from Browns fans. After everything you have seen throughout this training camp, who do you believe has actually done more to earn the bigger opportunity right now, Deshaun Watson or Shedeur Sanders? And do you think Cleveland should keep this competition open, or has one quarterback already shown enough? Drop your answer in the comments, because this Browns quarterback battle is getting closer to the point where the coaches will have to show us what they really believe. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay locked in. Because the next stage of this battle could finally tell us whether Shedeur Sanders keeps forcing his way forward, or whether Deshaun Watson finally creates the separation Cleveland has been waiting for.